The Wyoming wind carried screams across the dusty prairie as Maribel Quinn collapsed to her knees, clutching 5-year-old Hazel against her chest. Two men loomed over them, legal papers in hand and cruelty in their eyes. "The debt's due, Mrs. Quinn. The girl comes with us." Tears streamed down Maribel's face as rough hands reached for her daughter. Then hoofbeats thundered through the yard. A lone cowboy appeared at the lane's end, his shadow falling between mother and child and the men who would tear them apart. Before we begin this journey through the wild heart of 1880s Wyoming, I invite you to stay with us until the very end of this tale of courage, sacrifice, and redemption. And please, drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across this great land of ours. Now, let's step back in time together. The morning had started like any other in the hard-scrabble territory of southeastern Wyoming, where the land stretched endless and unforgiving beneath a sky so vast it could swallow a person's hopes whole. Maribel Quinn had risen before dawn, as she did every day since her husband Thomas passed 6 months prior, leaving her with a 5-year-old daughter, a failing ranch, and debts that multiplied like rabbits in spring. She'd lit the stove with hands that trembled from exhaustion, not cold, and put on coffee that was more chicory than bean. The cabin, if you could call it that, consisted of 3 rooms held together by hope and determination. The roof leaked in 2 places, the door hung crooked on its hinges, and the windows were covered with oiled paper because they couldn't afford glass. But it was theirs. Or at least it had been before Thomas took out that loan from Cyrus Blackwell. "Mama?" Hazel's small voice drifted from the bedroom they shared. "Is it morning time?" "Yes, sweet pea. Come get your breakfast." The little girl appeared in the doorway, her corn silk hair tangled from sleep, wearing a nightgown that Maribel had sewn from flour sacks. Despite their poverty, despite everything they'd lost, Hazel still smiled like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "Can we feed the chickens together today?" Hazel asked, climbing onto the rough-hewn bench at their table. "Of course we can." Maribel set down a bowl of cornmeal mush, their 3rd serving of it this week. "After breakfast, we'll gather the eggs too. Mrs. Henderson said she'd trade us some butter for a dozen." Hazel wrinkled her nose at the mush but didn't complain. She'd learned, too young, that complaining about food was a luxury they couldn't afford. Instead, she picked up her spoon and asked, "Mama, when is Papa coming home?" The question hit Maribel like a fist to the stomach, same as it did every time. She'd explained death to her daughter a dozen different ways, but Hazel's young mind couldn't quite grasp that her father, who used to swing her in circles until she squealed with laughter, who carved her wooden animals and told her stories about brave knights and beautiful princesses, was never coming back. "Remember, sweet pea, Papa's in heaven now, watching over us." "But when will he visit?" Maribel's throat tightened. "He visits us every day, honey. You just can't see him, but he's here, in the wind and the sunshine, in every good thing that happens to us." It was a pretty lie, the kind mothers told to spare their children from the harsh truth of the world. The real truth was uglier. Thomas Quinn had died trying to make enough money to pay back Cyrus Blackwell, working himself into an early grave in the silver mines up near South Pass City. He'd collapsed in a tunnel, they said, his heart giving out from the strain and the bad air. He was 31 years old. And the debt? The debt survived him just fine. After breakfast, Maribel and Hazel went outside to tend to what remained of their livestock, 3 chickens and an old milk cow named Bessie, who barely produced enough for their own needs, let alone to sell. The morning sun painted the prairie in shades of gold and amber, and for a moment, Maribel allowed herself to breathe, to simply exist in this moment with her daughter. "Mama, look!" Hazel pointed to the eastern horizon. "Someone's coming!" Maribel's heart seized in her chest. Visitors were rare out here, 15 miles from the nearest town of Bitter Creek, and in her experience, visitors usually brought trouble. She shaded her eyes against the sun and made out 2 figures in a wagon moving steadily toward their property. "Hazel, go inside." "But Mama—" "Now, sweet pea, please." Something in her mother's voice made Hazel obey without further question. The little girl scurried into the cabin, her bare feet kicking up dust. Maribel waited in the yard, her hands twisted in her apron as the wagon drew closer. When it finally pulled to a stop 20 feet from where she stood, Maribel recognized the 2 men immediately. Her stomach dropped like a stone into dark water. The first man, tall and lean, with a face like weathered leather, was named Coleman Briggs. He worked as an enforcer for Cyrus Blackwell, collecting debts and making sure people paid up, one way or another. The second man was younger, maybe 25, with cold eyes and a cruel smile that made Maribel's skin crawl. His name was Wade Jessup, and he'd earned a reputation in Bitter Creek for enjoying his work a little too much. "Mrs. Quinn," Coleman said, touching the brim of his hat in a mockery of politeness. "Lovely morning, isn't it? What do you want?" Maribel kept her voice steady, though her insides churned with fear. "Now, that's no way to greet visitors." Wade climbed down from the wagon, his boots hitting the ground with deliberate heaviness. "We rode all the way out here to have a conversation with you." "I have nothing to say to you. I've been making payments." "Those payments?" Coleman interrupted, pulling a ledger from inside his coat. "Let's see, $20 a month on a debt of $800, plus interest compounding at 15%. Mrs. Quinn, at this rate, you'll be paying us until your granddaughter has grandchildren of her own." "That's not fair. The original loan was only $300. "Interest isn't about fair, ma'am. It's about business." Coleman snapped the ledger shut. "And Mr. Blackwell's patience has run out. He wants the debt settled. Today." Maribel felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "I don't have $800. You know I don't. Nobody out here has that kind of money." "Well, now that's where we have a solution." Wade stepped closer, and Maribel retreated instinctively. "Mr. Blackwell's willing to forgive the entire debt in exchange for collateral." "Collateral? I don't have anything left. Thomas sold everything before he died. The land isn't even worth half what we owe." "We're not interested in the land, Mrs. Quinn." Coleman's voice dropped lower, colder. "We're interested in the girl." For a moment, Maribel couldn't process what she'd heard. The words didn't make sense, couldn't make sense. "What?" "Your daughter, Hazel, isn't it?" Wade pulled out a document from his pocket. "Indentured servitude, perfectly legal in the territory. She'll work for Mr. Blackwell until she's 18. Domestic service, mostly. He runs a respectable household in Cheyenne. She'll be fed, clothed, educated even. Better life than she'd have out here, starving on this dust patch you call a ranch." "No." The word came out as a whisper first, then louder. "No, absolutely not." "I'm afraid it's not up to you, ma'am." Coleman held up the papers. "Your husband signed these documents 3 weeks before he died. It's a contingency clause. If the debt cannot be repaid, the borrower agrees to provide labor as compensation. Since your husband is deceased, the obligation falls to his dependent children." That's slavery. You can't just take a child." "It's not slavery, Mrs. Quinn. It's contract law." Wade's smile widened. "And unless you can produce $800 in the next 10 minutes, we'll be taking the girl with us today." Maribel's vision blurred with tears. "Please, please, I'm begging you. Take the land, take the animals, take everything I own, but don't take my daughter. She's all I have left." "The land's worthless. The animals couldn't fetch $20 at auction, and everything you own wouldn't cover the interest alone." Coleman folded his arms across his chest. "Now, are you going to fetch the girl, or do we need to do it ourselves?" "No, you can't. I won't let you." Maribel turned and ran toward the cabin, but Wade was faster. He caught her arm and yanked her back so hard she stumbled and fell to her knees in the dirt. Pain shot through her joints, but she barely felt it over the terror flooding her system. "Mama!" Hazel's voice pierced the air. The little girl had appeared in the doorway, her face pale with fear. "Hazel, run! Run to the Henderson place!" Maribel screamed, trying to pull free from Wade's grip, but he held her firmly, his fingers digging into her arm hard enough to leave bruises. "There's nowhere to run, little girl," Coleman called out, walking toward the cabin with long, measured strides. "This doesn't have to be difficult. You're going on an adventure to the big city. Won't that be exciting?" "Mama!" Hazel's scream tore through Maribel's heart. The little girl stood frozen in the doorway, torn between obedience to her mother's command and the instinct to run to her. "Let me go! Let me go!" Maribel clawed at Wade's hand, but he just laughed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Mrs. Quinn." He dragged her across the dirt yard as she struggled. "The girl's going either way. You can let her go with dignity, or you can watch us take her by force. Your choice." Coleman reached the cabin porch. Hazel backed into the doorway, tears streaming down her small face. "I want my mama!" "Come here, girl." Coleman's voice was firm but not unkind, the tone of a man who'd done this before and knew that gentleness made the process easier. "Nobody's going to hurt you. We're just taking you to a new home." "No!" Hazel darted into the cabin, and Coleman followed without hesitation. Maribel heard furniture crashing, heard her daughter's terrified screams, and something inside her shattered. She stopped trying to pull away from Wade and instead lunged forward, using his grip on her arm as leverage. The unexpected movement caught him off balance, and he stumbled. It was enough. Maribel wrenched free and ran toward the cabin, her only thought to reach her child, to shield her daughter with her own body if that's what it took. She made it halfway to the door before Wade tackled her from behind. They hit the ground hard, dust billowing around them. Maribel couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only hear Hazel screaming, "Mama! Mama! Mama!" from inside the cabin. "Stay down!" Wade pinned her arms behind her back, his knee pressed into her spine. "You're only making this worse for yourself and the girl." "Please," Maribel sobbed into the dirt. "Please don't take her. She's just a baby. Please, I'll do anything. Anything. I'll work for Blackwell myself. I'll sign any contract you want. Just let her stay with me. Please, God, please." Coleman emerged from the cabin carrying Hazel, who kicked and screamed and fought with every ounce of strength in her small body. The sight broke something fundamental in Maribel. She heard a sound escape her own throat, a wail of pure anguish that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. "Mama, Mama, help me! I want to stay with you, Mama!" Hazel's small hands reached desperately toward her mother, fingers grasping at empty air. "Let me up," Maribel begged Wade. "Let me say goodbye to her at least. Please. You must have a mother somewhere. You must understand, please." Wade hesitated, then looked at Coleman, who gave a curt nod. "Let her up. Give them a minute. The girl will be easier to handle if she thinks she's going willingly." Wade released Maribel and hauled her to her feet. She stumbled toward Coleman, her whole body shaking, and he set Hazel down but kept a firm hand on the child's shoulder. Maribel dropped to her knees and pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her so tightly Hazel let out a small gasp. "Listen to me, sweet pea. Listen carefully. Mama loves you more than anything in this world, more than the sky and the stars and everything in between." "I don't want to go. I want to stay with you." Hazel buried her face in her mother's neck, her small body convulsing with sobs. "I know, baby. I know, but sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do." Maribel pulled back just enough to look into her daughter's tear-filled eyes. "I need you to be brave for me. Can you be brave?" "I don't want to be brave. I want to stay here." "Mrs. Quinn," Coleman's voice held a note of warning. "Time's up." "One more minute," Maribel pleaded, looking up at him. "One more minute with my daughter. I'm begging you." Coleman's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "1 minute. Then we're leaving." Maribel turned back to Hazel, smoothing her daughter's hair with trembling hands. "Remember the stories Papa used to tell you about the princess who was taken far away but never forgot her home?" Hazel nodded, hiccuping through her tears. "That's going to be you, sweet pea. You're going to be so brave, and no matter where you go or how far away you are, I'll always love you. And one day," her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue, "one day I'll find a way to bring you home. I promise. Do you believe me?" Yes, Mama. Good girl. Such a good, brave girl." Maribel kissed her daughter's forehead, her cheeks, her small hands, trying to memorize every detail of this child she'd carried and birthed and loved more than her own life. "Remember, Papa's watching over you from heaven, and I'm here thinking about you every single second of every single day." "Mrs. Quinn." Coleman's hand closed around Hazel's shoulder again. "It's time." "No, wait!" But Coleman was already lifting Hazel, and the little girl's screams started again, even louder than before. "Mama! No! I want my mama!" Maribel lunged forward, but Wade caught her and held her back. She fought against him with everything she had, screaming her daughter's name, reaching for her, trying desperately to get to her child. Coleman carried Hazel to the wagon and set her in the back, where he quickly secured her with a rope, not tight enough to hurt, but enough to keep her from jumping out. The little girl's screams pierced the morning air, raw and desperate. "No, please, God, no!" Maribel collapsed against Wade, all her strength gone. "Please don't take her. Take me instead. Take me!" Wade released her, and she fell to her hands and knees in the dirt, watching through tear-blurred vision as Coleman climbed onto the wagon seat. Wade joined him, taking up the reins. "Mama! Mama! Don't let them take me!" Hazel's voice was already growing hoarse from screaming. Maribel tried to stand to run after the wagon, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She crawled forward instead, dirt embedding in her palms and knees. "Hazel, baby, Mama loves you. Remember, I love you." The wagon started moving, wheels crunching over the hard-packed earth of the yard. Hazel's small face appeared over the back edge, streaked with tears and dirt, her mouth open in another scream that seemed to tear the very sky apart. "Come back, please come back, don't take my baby." Maribel's voice cracked and broke, but she kept screaming. "Hazel! Hazel!" The wagon picked up speed, heading down the long lane that led to the main road. Maribel got to her feet somehow and ran after it, her nightdress tangling around her legs, her bare feet pounding against the ground. But the horses were fresh and strong, and she was exhausted and weak from months of grief and hunger. The distance between them grew, 20 feet, 30 feet, 50 feet. "Hazel!" She could still see her daughter's small form in the back of the wagon, could still hear her screams, though they were growing fainter now with distance. "Please, please, God, please!" Maribel's legs gave out again, and she fell hard, her hands scraping against rocks and sagebrush. "Don't take my child! Don't take her! Hazel!" The wagon was 100 yards away now, maybe more, kicking up a cloud of dust in its wake. Maribel pushed herself up one more time, took 3 more staggering steps, and fell again. This time she didn't try to get up. She just lay there in the dirt, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, watching the wagon carry away the only thing in this world she loved. "Hazel," she whispered, the word barely audible. "My baby. My sweet baby." The wagon reached the end of the lane and turned onto the main road. In seconds it would be out of sight, disappearing over the low rise that marked her property line. Hazel would be gone. Really, truly gone. Maribel closed her eyes, unable to watch, and prayed for death to take her too. What was the point of living in a world without her daughter? What was the point of anything? Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Not the slow, steady clip-clop of draft horses pulling a wagon, but the rapid thunder of a single horse moving fast, very fast. Maribel's eyes flew open. She pushed herself up on her elbows, squinting through tear-swollen eyes and settling dust, trying to see. A rider appeared at the end of her lane, coming from the opposite direction of the wagon. He sat tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the sun, and he was riding hard, heading straight for the wagon that carried Hazel. "Help!" Maribel tried to call out, but her voice was gone, destroyed by screaming. She tried again, forcing the word past her raw throat. "Help! They took my daughter!" The rider couldn't have heard her from that distance, but something made him spur his horse even faster. He was going to intercept the wagon. She could see the trajectory now, see that if he maintained his speed and they maintained theirs, he'd reach them right about where they'd turned onto the road. Maribel staggered to her feet, her entire body shaking. She started walking, then limping, then running as best she could with bloody feet and exhausted legs. She had to get there, had to reach Hazel, had to. The rider reached the wagon just as Coleman noticed him and pulled back on the reins. The wagon lurched to a stop, and the rider positioned his horse directly across the road, blocking their path. Even from a distance, Maribel could see Coleman's mouth moving, could imagine the angry words, the commands to move aside. The rider didn't move. He just sat there on his horse, as immovable as the mountains themselves. Wade stood up in the wagon seat, and Maribel's heart seized. She'd seen him wear a gun, knew he wouldn't hesitate to use it if he felt threatened. But the rider simply raised one hand in a gesture that was half greeting, half warning, and said something that made Wade sit back down. Maribel ran harder, ignoring the pain in her feet, ignoring the burning in her lungs. She was close enough now to see details. The rider was young, maybe 30, with broad shoulders and the weathered look of a man who spent his life outdoors. His horse was a beautiful roan mare, well cared for and alert. But what struck her most was the way he sat, relaxed but ready, calm but commanding. This was a man who'd been in difficult situations before and knew how to handle himself. "Move aside, cowboy," Coleman's voice carried across the distance. This doesn't concern you. That little girl screaming her lungs out in your wagon says different. The rider's voice was deep and steady, with the accent of someone raised in these parts. Seems to me you've got a problem. The only problem here is you blocking the road. This is a legal matter. Legal matter? The rider leaned forward slightly in his saddle. Funny kind of legal matter that involves tying up a 5-year-old child and making her mother scream like someone's killing her. Maribel was close enough now to hear everything, close enough to see Hazel in the back of the wagon, still tied but staring at the stranger with wide, hopeful eyes. We have documentation, Wade said, pulling out the papers. Signed and witnessed. The girl's father agreed to indentured servitude as collateral for a debt. It's all legal. Let me see those papers. Like hell. Let me see them, the rider repeated, and this time there was steel beneath the calm. Or I'll assume you're lying, and we'll have a different kind of conversation. Coleman muttered something under his breath but handed over the documents. The rider read them carefully, his expression never changing. These papers, he finally said, say the borrower agrees to provide labor. Thomas Quinn. That's the girl's father? Was her father. He's dead. So how does a dead man's obligation transfer to his child? That's not what this contract says. It says the borrower, not the borrower's dependents. Wade and Coleman exchanged a glance. Well, that's implied. Implied. The rider handed the papers back. Mister, I'm not a lawyer, but I know bullshit when I smell it. This contract doesn't give you any legal claim to that child. The debt is real, Coleman insisted. $800 plus interest. And if Mrs. Quinn can't pay, then you take her land, her animals, whatever she's got. But you don't take a child. Not on my watch. Maribel finally reached them, gasping for breath. She wanted to speak, to thank this stranger, to beg him to save her daughter, but her throat was too raw and her lungs too empty. The rider glanced at her, and something in his expression softened. Ma'am, this your daughter? She nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face again. What's your name, ma'am? Maribel, she managed to croak. Maribel Quinn. Mrs. Quinn, do you owe these men money? Yes. My husband, he took a loan before he died. $300. But they say with interest it's $800 now, and I can't pay. I don't have that much, but they can't take Hazel. They can't. All right, ma'am. Just breathe. He looked back at Coleman and Wade. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to untie that little girl and give her back to her mother. Then you're going to leave this property and not come back. The hell we are. Wade's hand moved toward his belt, where his pistol rested in its holster. In a movement so fast Maribel almost missed it, the rider pulled his own gun, a well-worn Colt .45 that looked like it had seen plenty of use. He didn't point it at anyone, just held it casually across his saddle horn, but the message was clear. I wouldn't, he said quietly. I really wouldn't. Wade's hand froze, then slowly moved away from his weapon. Now, I'll ask you one more time, nice and polite. Untie the girl. We have legal rights, Coleman protested, but his voice had lost its certainty. Take it up with Sheriff Hollister in town. Tell him what you tried to do here today. See how legal he thinks it is. The rider's eyes narrowed. Or better yet, take it up with Judge Morrison. He's got a granddaughter about that age. I'm sure he'd love to hear how you plan to take a 5-year-old away from her mother over a debt that's probably based on fraudulent interest calculations. Maribel saw the moment Coleman realized he'd lost. His shoulders sagged slightly, and he nodded to Wade. Untie her. But Mr. Blackwell, I said untie her. Wade climbed into the back of the wagon, grumbling under his breath, and loosened the rope around Hazel. The moment she was free, the little girl scrambled toward the edge of the wagon bed. Hazel! Maribel rushed forward, her arms outstretched. The rider smoothly dismounted, his gun still in hand but pointed down, and lifted Hazel out of the wagon. He set her gently on the ground, and she flew into her mother's arms like a bird finally released from a cage. Mama, Mama, I was so scared. Hazel clung to her mother, her small body trembling. I know, Sweet Pea, I know. It's okay now. You're safe. Mama's got you. Maribel sank to the ground, holding her daughter, rocking her back and forth. "You're safe, baby. You're safe." The rider kept his attention on Coleman and Wade. "Get out of here and don't come back." "This isn't over," Coleman said, gathering the reins. "Mr. Blackwell doesn't like being crossed." "Then maybe Mr. Blackwell should stop trying to kidnap children." The rider's voice was flat, final. "Go on. Get." The wagon pulled away, heading back toward Bitter Creek. The rider watched until it disappeared over the rise, then finally holstered his gun and turned to Maribel and Hazel. "Are you hurt, ma'am? Either of you?" Maribel looked up at him through tear-filled eyes. He was younger than she'd first thought, probably not much past 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of winter sky. His face was sun-weathered and strong, with the kind of quiet strength that came from facing hard things and surviving them. "My feet," she managed to say. "I ran after them, fell a few times." He knelt down, keeping a respectful distance, and examined her feet. They were bloody and torn, embedded with small rocks and thorns. "These need tending. Can you walk?" I don't know." Without asking permission, he scooped her up in his arms, Hazel still clinging to her, and started walking toward the cabin. His strength was effortless, his movement sure and steady. "What's your name?" Maribel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sawyer," he said. "Sawyer Drummond." "Thank you, Mr. Drummond. Thank you for saving my daughter. I thought they were going to take her and I'd never see her again, and I couldn't stop them. I tried, but I couldn't." "Easy, ma'am. You don't need to thank me. Any decent person would have done the same." But Maribel knew that wasn't true. Plenty of people would have ridden past, not wanting to get involved. Plenty of people would have seen a poor widow and her child and decided it wasn't their problem. Sawyer Drummond had stopped. He'd stood between them and danger. He'd saved Hazel when Maribel couldn't. And as he carried them toward the cabin, Hazel peeking at him shyly from her mother's arms, Maribel felt something she hadn't felt in 6 long months. Hope. Sawyer carried them across the threshold and set Maribel gently on the rough wooden bench by the table. Hazel refused to let go of her mother's neck, her small fingers locked together like a chain that couldn't be broken. The cowboy didn't try to separate them. Instead, he moved quietly through the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the patched walls, the desperate poverty that hung in the air like smoke. "You got any clean water?" he asked, his voice low and careful, the way a man might speak around a spooked horse. "There's a bucket by the stove," Maribel managed. Her throat still burned from screaming, and every word felt like swallowing broken glass. "Should be clean. I fetched it this morning." Sawyer found the bucket and a rag that had seen better days, but was at least relatively clean. He pulled the other bench closer to where Maribel sat and knelt down in front of her. "I need to clean those feet, ma'am. It's going to hurt some." "I don't care." And she didn't. Physical pain was nothing compared to what she'd felt watching that wagon carry Hazel away. "Do what you need to do." He worked with surprising gentleness for a man with such large, calloused hands. The water was cold, and Maribel hissed when it first touched her torn skin, but Sawyer's touch remained steady and careful. He cleaned away the blood and dirt, removed the embedded rocks and thorns with infinite patience, and never once complained about the task. Hazel watched him with wide eyes, her thumb in her mouth, a habit she'd abandoned months ago, but had apparently returned to in her fear. "Are you a good cowboy or a bad cowboy?" she asked around her thumb. A ghost of a smile touched Sawyer's mouth. "I try to be good, little miss. Don't always succeed, but I try. Bad cowboys took me away from Mama." "I know they did, but you're back now, safe and sound." "Will they come back?" The question was small and terrified. Sawyer paused in his work and looked directly at Hazel. "Not while I'm here, they won't, and I'm not planning on leaving for a bit. That all right with you?" Hazel nodded solemnly, then turned to her mother. "Mama, can the good cowboy stay?" "Sweet pea, Mr. Drummond has his own life. His own ranch, probably. We can't ask him to." "Actually, ma'am," Sawyer interrupted, returning his attention to her feet, "I don't have a ranch. I work for the Double R spread, about 10 miles north of here. But I'm between jobs at the moment. Boss gave me a week off after we finished the spring branding. So if you need help, I've got time." Maribel studied him more carefully now. He wore typical cowboy gear, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, scuffed boots that had seen hard use, and a hat that had protected his face from sun and rain for what looked like years. His gun belt was well oiled and cared for, the holster positioned for a quick draw. This was a man who knew how to handle himself in trouble. But there was something else too, something in his eyes that spoke of old sorrows carefully packed away. She recognized it because she saw the same thing in her own mirror every morning. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "Why would you help us? You don't know us. This isn't your problem." Sawyer was quiet for a long moment, wrapping her right foot with strips torn from the cleanest part of the rag. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that might have been old pain. "Had a little sister once. Sarah. She'd be about your daughter's age now if she'd lived. Fever took her when she was 3. Took my whole family, actually, Ma, Pa, and Sarah, all in the same week." "I'm so sorry," Maribel whispered. "Was a long time ago, 10 years now." He started on her left foot. "But I remember how my ma fought that fever, stayed up for days trying to save them. Remember how she begged God and the doctor and anyone who'd listen to save her babies. And I remember being 16 years old and helpless, unable to do a damn thing but watch them die." He tied off the bandage and sat back on his heels. "So when I see a woman fighting for her child, doing everything she can against people bigger and stronger and meaner than her, I figure I can help. I figure maybe that's why I rode down this particular road on this particular morning. Maybe my sister's watching from heaven and sent me here. Or maybe it's just chance. Either way, I'm here, and I'm not leaving until I know you and your daughter are safe." Hazel had been listening intently. She removed her thumb from her mouth and asked, "Is your sister an angel now?" "I expect she is, little miss. My papa's an angel too. Mama says he watches over us." "Then I imagine he's mighty relieved I came along when I did." Sawyer stood and carried the bucket outside to empty it. Through the open door, Maribel could see him examining the property, the sagging fence, the lean-to that served as a barn, the chicken coop that listed dangerously to one side. When he came back in, his expression was carefully neutral. "Ma'am, I don't mean to be rude, but are those 3 chickens and that old cow all the livestock you've got?" Maribel felt her cheeks burn with shame. "We had more. 12 chickens, 3 cows, 2 pigs, and a decent horse. Thomas sold most of them to make payments on the loan. Then after he died, I had to sell the rest just to buy food. Kept Bessie because we need the milk, and the chickens because they give us eggs to trade." "What about crops? You got any fields planted?" "Thomas plowed 2 acres before he went to the mines. I tried to plant it myself, but I didn't know what I was doing, and the seeds didn't take. Lost the whole crop." Her voice cracked. "I'm not a rancher, Mr. Drummond. I'm just a woman trying to keep my daughter alive, and I'm failing at even that." "You're not failing." The conviction in his voice made her look up. "You're surviving against odds that would have broken most people. That takes strength, Mrs. Quinn. Real strength." "Strength?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "I couldn't even stop 2 men from taking my daughter. I fell in the dirt like a helpless child while they—" She broke off, unable to finish the sentence. "You fought them. I saw the bruises on your arms, saw how torn up your feet are from chasing that wagon. You didn't give up, didn't stop fighting even when they had every advantage. That's not weakness, ma'am. That's courage." Tears burned in Maribel's eyes again, but these were different from before. These were tears of exhaustion and relief and the overwhelming feeling of being seen, truly seen, by another human being. "I was so scared," she whispered, "so scared I'd never get her back." "I know, but you did. She's right here, safe in your arms." Hazel had been quiet during this exchange, her head resting against her mother's shoulder. Now she stirred and said in a small voice, "Mama, I'm hungry." The simple statement drove home the reality of their situation. Maribel looked at the stove, at the pot of cornmeal mush that had gone cold hours ago. "I'll warm up breakfast, sweet pea." "Let me." Sawyer was already moving toward the stove. "You rest those feet. Where's your firewood?" "There's not much left. I've been using buffalo chips mostly." "I'll chop some fresh after we eat. You got any food besides cornmeal?" The shame was back, hot and heavy in Maribel's chest. "Some beans. A little salt pork, but I was saving that for Sunday dinner. And there's eggs from this morning. Beans and eggs sound good. I'll make enough for all of us. He set about building up the fire, moving with the easy efficiency of a man accustomed to taking care of himself. When's the last time you had a proper meal, ma'am? Maribel couldn't remember. Days? Weeks? She'd been giving most of her portions to Hazel, eating just enough to keep herself functioning. I eat fine. That's not what I asked. Sawyer glanced at her, and she saw he wasn't fooled for a second. You're thin as a rail, ma'am. Can't take care of your daughter if you don't take care of yourself. I do what I have to do. I know you do, but today you're going to sit there and let someone take care of you for a change. Can you do that? There was something in his tone, not pity exactly, but compassion mixed with a firmness that said arguing would be pointless. Maribel found herself nodding, too exhausted to protest. While Sawyer cooked, Hazel gradually relaxed her death grip on her mother's neck. She watched the cowboy with the intensity of a child trying to decide if this new person could be trusted. What's your horse's name? She finally asked. Rosie, Sawyer replied, stirring the beans. She's a good girl, been with me for 5 years now. Can I pet her? After breakfast, if your mama says it's all right. She's gentle as a kitten, won't hurt you. Mama, can I? Maribel brushed Hazel's tangled hair back from her face. We'll see, Sweet Pea. Mr. Drummond might need to head home after he eats. I told you, ma'am. I'm not leaving just yet. He cracked 3 eggs into a pan. Those men know where you live, know you're here alone with a child. They might decide to come back with more help, or they might send word to this Blackwell fellow, and he might come himself. Either way, I figure you could use someone around for a few days, at least until we can get the sheriff out here. The sheriff? Maribel's stomach tightened. Mr. Drummond, I can't involve the law. If they investigate the debt, if they look at the loan papers, they might decide Coleman and Wade were right. They might take Hazel legally this time, and I won't be able to stop them. Ma'am, you don't understand. The law hasn't been kind to people like me. Poor people. People who can't afford lawyers or court fees. The judge in Bitter Creek, he's friends with Cyrus Blackwell. Everyone knows it. If this goes to court, I'll lose. I'll lose everything. Sawyer was quiet, dishing up plates of beans and eggs. He set one in front of Hazel, another in front of Maribel, and kept the third for himself. Eat first. We'll figure out the rest after. The food smelled better than anything Maribel had eaten in months. She picked up a fork with trembling hands and took a bite. The beans were perfectly seasoned. He'd found her meager supply of salt and pepper and used them sparingly but well. The eggs were cooked through but still tender. It was simple fare, but to her starving body, it tasted like a feast. Hazel ate with the single-minded focus of a hungry child, scooping food into her mouth so fast Maribel had to remind her to chew. Slow down, Sweet Pea, it's not going anywhere. But it's so good, Mama. Sawyer smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. Glad you like it, little miss. There's more if you want it. They ate in silence for a while. The only sounds, the scrape of forks on tin plates and the crackle of the fire. Maribel found herself studying Sawyer when he wasn't looking. He was probably 30 or 31, not much older than her own 27 years. His hands were scarred from hard work, his face lined by sun and wind, but there was something fundamentally decent in his bearing. He reminded her a little of Thomas in the early days, before the debt and the fear had worn him down to nothing. Mr. Drummond, she said finally, I can't pay you. For the food, for your help, for any of it. I have nothing. Didn't ask for payment. I know, but it doesn't seem right. You've done so much already. Mrs. Quinn, let me ask you something. If you saw a man drowning in a river, would you jump in to save him? Of course I would. Would you expect him to pay you after? No, but that's different. It's not different at all. You help people because it's the right thing to do, not because you expect something in return. He finished his beans and set his plate aside. Now, I meant what I said about staying around for a few days, but I won't do it if it makes you uncomfortable. If you want me to leave after I chop that firewood, just say the word. Maribel looked at Hazel, who had finished her breakfast and was watching Sawyer with open curiosity. She thought about the terror she'd felt this morning, the absolute helplessness. She thought about Coleman and Wade coming back, maybe with more men, maybe with legal papers that were actually enforceable this time. And she thought about this quiet cowboy who'd stepped between her daughter and danger without hesitation. "Stay," she heard herself say. "Please. At least for tonight. I don't think I can face another night alone, wondering if they'll come back." Something shifted in Sawyer's expression, a softening around his eyes. "All right then. I'll bed down in the lean-to with Rosie, if that's acceptable." "You can't sleep in there. It's falling apart and full of spiders. I've slept in worse places, ma'am. Besides, I'll be close enough to hear if there's any trouble." He stood and collected the plates. "Now, let me get started on that firewood. You rest those feet." But Maribel couldn't rest. As soon as Sawyer went outside, she found herself pacing, or trying to, though her bandaged feet made it difficult. Hazel followed her, staying close, her earlier terror still evident in the way she jumped at every sound. Through the window, Maribel watched Sawyer work. He found the old axe leaning against the cabin wall, Thomas's axe, with its blade dulled from disuse, and spent several minutes sharpening it on a whetstone he produced from his saddlebag. Then he set about chopping wood with steady, powerful strokes that spoke of years of practice. The pile grew quickly, far more wood than Maribel could have chopped in a week of trying. Her husband had handled all the heavy work, and after his death, she'd struggled with tasks that required strength she simply didn't have. She'd learned to make do with less heat, less hot water, less of everything, rather than admit she couldn't manage. But watching Sawyer work, she realized how much she'd been drowning, how close she'd come to going under completely. "Mama?" Hazel tugged on her skirt. "Can I go see Rosie now?" Maribel hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but stay where I can see you." They went outside together, Maribel leaning on her daughter for balance. Sawyer had tied Rosie to the fence post, and the horse stood patiently, her ears flicking at flies. She was a beautiful animal, well-muscled and healthy, with a coat that gleamed even through the dust of travel. "Hello, girl," Hazel said shyly, reaching out one small hand. Rosie lowered her head and snuffled gently at the child's palm, making Hazel giggle. "She tickles." "She likes you," Sawyer called from where he was stacking wood. "Not all horses take to children so quick." "She's so pretty." Hazel stroked Rosie's nose with reverent care. "Mama, can we have a horse like this someday?" "Maybe, sweet pea, someday." But even as she said it, Maribel knew it was another pretty lie. There would be no someday, not for people like them. They'd be lucky to keep the 3 chickens and old Bessie. A horse like Rosie was as far out of reach as the moon. Sawyer must have heard the defeat in her voice because he paused his work and looked at her. "Mrs. Quinn, we need to talk about your situation. Really talk about it." "I know." She did know. Avoiding the problem wouldn't make it go away. "Let me get Hazel settled inside first." "No, Mama." Hazel's grip on her skirt tightened. "I want to stay with you." "I'm not going anywhere, sweet pea. I'll be right here on the porch, where you can see me. But you need to go inside and play with your dolls for a bit while the grown-ups talk." "But, Hazel," Maribel crouched down, ignoring the pain in her feet. "I need you to be brave again. Can you do that for me?" The little girl's lip trembled, but she nodded. "I'll be brave." "That's my good girl. Now go on. We won't be long." Hazel trudged into the cabin, looking back every few steps to make sure her mother was still there. Only when she was inside, visible through the open door playing with the cornhusk doll Thomas had made her, did Maribel allow herself to turn to Sawyer. He'd stopped chopping and was leaning on the axe, watching her with those calm, assessing eyes. "How much do you really owe, Mrs. Quinn?" "I told you, $800 according to Coleman and Wade, but the original loan was only $300. Thomas borrowed it to buy seed and equipment, thinking he could make the ranch profitable. Instead," she gestured at the failing property around them. "Instead, nothing grew, the cattle got sick, and everything fell apart. He tried to make payments, but Blackwell kept adding interest and fees. Thomas said it was like trying to dig out of a hole while someone kept shoveling dirt back in. So he went to the mines. Yes, he thought if he could just make enough to pay off the loan, we could start over. But the work killed him." Her voice went flat, emotionless. "Doctor said his heart gave out from the strain, but I think it was hope that killed him. Hope running out, leaving nothing behind but tired. Sawyer was quiet for a moment. You have any proof of the original loan amount? Any papers? Thomas kept everything in a tin box under the bed. I haven't looked at it since he died. Couldn't bring myself to. Mind if I look now? She shook her head and led him inside. The tin box was exactly where it had always been, shoved into the far corner under the bed frame. She pulled it out, her hands trembling, and set it on the table. Inside were papers, neatly folded and organized because Thomas had always been particular about such things. Loan documents, receipts, letters. Sawyer spread them out and began reading with careful attention. Maribel watched his face as he worked through the papers. She saw his jaw tighten, saw a muscle jump in his cheek. "What?" she asked. "What is it?" "This loan," he held up the original document. "It was for $300, you're right about that. But the interest rate listed here is 5% annually, not 15. And look at this receipt. This payment your husband made 4 months ago? It was for $50, but the loan balance only decreased by 20. Where'd the other 30 go? Fees, they said. Administrative fees and penalties for late payment." "Late payment?" Sawyer's voice rose slightly. "This receipt is dated for the exact day the payment was due. There's nothing late about it." He kept reading, and with each document, his expression grew darker. "Mrs. Quinn, you're being robbed. This whole debt has been manufactured through false fees and fraudulent interest calculations. I'd bet my last dollar that if we added up all your husband's payments, you'd find he actually paid back the original 300+ legitimate interest. You probably don't owe Blackwell anything at all." Hope fluttered in Maribel's chest, painful and tentative. "Are you sure?" "I'm not a lawyer, but I've been around cattle deals and land contracts enough to know fraud when I see it. These papers prove it." He tapped the documents. "Question is, what do we do about it?" "I told you, we can't go to the sheriff. Maybe not the one in Bitter Creek, but there's a federal marshal up in Cheyenne. Name's Ben Hollister. Good man, honest as they come. I worked with him a few years back when there was trouble with rustlers hitting the double R. He doesn't care who you know or how much money you have. He cares about the law. Cheyenne's 3 days' ride from here. 2 days if you push it. I could be there and back in less than a week." "No!" The word came out sharper than Maribel intended. "No, I can't let you do that. You've already done too much, and if Blackwell finds out you're going to the marshal, he might—" She broke off, unable to voice her fear. "He might what? Come after me?" Sawyer's smile was grim. "Let him try." "You don't understand. Cyrus Blackwell isn't just a loan shark, he's dangerous. People who cross him have a habit of disappearing or having accidents. Thomas was terrified of him, and with good reason. Mrs. Quinn, and even if the marshal agrees to investigate, even if he arrests Blackwell and his men, what happens to me and Hazel in the meantime? We're still out here alone, still vulnerable. I can't protect her by myself. I couldn't protect her this morning." The admission cost her, made her feel small and useless. But it was the truth, and Sawyer deserved the truth after everything he'd done. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "What if you weren't alone?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I stayed here? Not just for a few days, but until this whole mess is sorted out. I could work the ranch, fix what needs fixing, make sure you and Hazel are safe." Maribel stared at him. You do that? Stay here with strangers, work for no pay, risk making an enemy of Cyrus Blackwell? Why?" "Because it's the right thing to do." "That's not enough of a reason to upend your life." "Isn't it?" He leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Quinn, I've been drifting for 10 years now, ever since my family died. Working one ranch, then another, never staying long, never putting down roots. It's a lonely way to live. Maybe it's time I stopped drifting. Maybe helping you and your daughter is exactly what I need to be doing. But the double R, your job, the foreman's a friend. He'll understand. And if he doesn't, well, there's always work for a decent cowhand somewhere else." Maribel shook her head, overwhelmed. "I can't ask you to do this." "You're not asking, I'm offering. But why? You don't even know us." Sawyer's expression softened. "I know you're a mother fighting to protect her child. I know you're stronger than you think you are. And I know that sometimes God, or fate, or whatever you want to call it, puts people in our path for a reason. Maybe I'm supposed to be here, Mrs. Quinn. Maybe this is where I finally stop drifting and start living again. Through the doorway, they could hear Hazel singing softly to her doll, a made-up song about angels and horses and brave cowboys. The sound of her voice, innocent and trusting, made Maribel's decision for her. "All right," she whispered. "All right, if you're sure." "I'm sure. But I insist on paying you something. I can't pay much, but room and board is payment enough. And Mrs. Quinn?" He waited until she met his eyes. "You can call me Sawyer. I think we're past formalities now, don't you?" A smile tugged at her lips, the first genuine smile she'd felt in months. "Only if you call me Maribel." "Maribel it is." They shook hands across the table, sealing an agreement that felt somehow like the beginning of something important, something that might, possibly, save them all. Outside, the Wyoming wind continued its eternal song across the prairie. But inside the cabin, for the first time since Thomas died, Maribel Quinn felt something that had been absent for far too long. She felt safe. The afternoon sun climbed higher as Sawyer set to work transforming the failing ranch into something that might actually sustain life. Maribel watched from the porch, her bandaged feet propped up on an overturned crate, as he moved from task to task with the kind of methodical efficiency that came from years of ranch work. He started with the chicken coop, reinforcing the sagging walls with wood scraps he found around the property, hammering in nails with sure, steady strikes that echoed across the empty prairie. Hazel sat beside her mother, still clutching her corn-husk doll, her eyes never leaving the cowboy for more than a few seconds at a time. The morning's terror had left its mark. She jumped at loud noises and refused to go more than a few feet from Maribel's side. But there was something else in her expression too, a cautious fascination with this stranger who'd saved her. "Mama," she whispered, "is he really going to stay?" "For a while, sweet pea, until we're safe." "Will those bad men come back?" Maribel pulled her daughter closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Not if Sawyer's here, and even if they try, we won't be alone this time." "I like him," Hazel announced with the simple certainty of childhood. "He has kind eyes." She was right, Maribel realized. Despite the hardness that years of solitary living had etched into Sawyer's features, his eyes held genuine warmth. They were the eyes of a man who'd suffered loss but hadn't let it turn him cruel. By the time the sun reached its zenith, Sawyer had not only fixed the chicken coop, but also patched 3 holes in the lean-to's roof and begun work on the sagging fence that surrounded what remained of the property. He worked without complaint, pausing only to water Rosie and accept the tin cup of well water that Maribel insisted on bringing him. "You should rest," she told him, noting the sweat staining his shirt. "You've been at it for hours. Still got daylight." He wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "Want to get as much done as possible before dark. Once word spreads that I'm here, Blackwell might decide to make a move. Rather be ready for him." The casual mention of danger made Maribel's stomach clench. "You really think he'll come? Man like that? Man who's built his business on intimidating people who can't fight back?" Sawyer's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I think he'll come. Question is when, not if. Maybe I should just pay him. Find some way to get the money." "With what? You going to sell that cow and those 3 chickens? That wouldn't cover 1/10 of what he claims you owe." He shook his head firmly. "No, Maribel. Running from bullies just encourages them. Sometimes you have to stand and fight." "But what if someone gets hurt? What if Hazel—" "Nothing's going to happen to Hazel. Or to you." The conviction in his voice was absolute. "I give you my word on that." Before Maribel could respond, the sound of hoofbeats drifted across the prairie. Multiple horses, moving fast. Her heart jumped into her throat, and she was halfway to her feet before Sawyer's hand on her shoulder stopped her. "Easy," he said quietly. "Get Hazel inside. Don't come out unless I call for you." "Sawyer, go. Now." The steel beneath his calm tone brooked no argument. Maribel scooped up Hazel and hurried into the cabin, her injured feet screaming in protest. She positioned herself by the window where she could see out but remain hidden, holding her daughter tight against her chest. Sawyer stood in the center of the yard, relaxed but ready, his hand resting casually near his holstered gun. Three riders appeared over the rise, and Maribel's breath caught when she recognized the lead horse. It was Sheriff Elias Tucker from Bitter Creek, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a badge pinned to his vest and a reputation for looking the other way when Cyrus Blackwell's name came up. Behind him rode two deputies, both young and eager-looking, the kind of men who enjoyed having authority over others. Tucker reined in his horse about 15 feet from Sawyer, his eyes sweeping the property with undisguised disdain. "You Drummond." "I am, and you're Sheriff Tucker, unless I miss my guess. Got a complaint filed against you. Assault, theft, and interfering with legal debt collection." Tucker pulled a paper from his coat pocket. "Says here you attacked two men this morning and stole property belonging to Mr. Cyrus Blackwell." Sawyer's expression didn't change. "That's an interesting version of events. Not accurate, but interesting. You saying you didn't assault Coleman Briggs and Wade Jessup?" "I'm saying they tried to kidnap a 5-year-old child, and I stopped them. There's a difference." "Kidnap?" Tucker snorted. "They had legal papers. They had fraudulent papers claiming a dead man's debt could be transferred to his minor child. That's not legal anywhere in this territory, and you know it." Tucker's eyes narrowed. "You a lawyer, Drummond?" "Don't need to be a lawyer to know right from wrong, Sheriff. And what those men tried to do this morning was wrong." "That's not for you to decide. Mrs. Quinn has debts that need settling." "Mrs. Quinn has been robbed," Sawyer interrupted, his voice hardening. "I've seen the loan papers. The interest calculations are fraudulent, the fees are invented, and I'd wager that if you actually investigated instead of taking Blackwell's word as gospel, you'd find she doesn't owe him a cent." One of the deputies shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. Sawyer noticed, and his own stance changed subtly, weight balanced, ready to move. Maribel felt her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Tucker raised a hand, stopping his deputy. "That's a serious accusation you're making." "It's the truth. And if you're the kind of lawman who cares about truth, you'll take a look at those papers yourself instead of just doing Blackwell's dirty work for him." The sheriff's face flushed dark red. "Watch your mouth, cowboy. I could arrest you right now for obstruction." "On what grounds?" "I haven't broken any laws. I stopped two men from committing a crime, which last I checked is something citizens are encouraged to do." Sawyer crossed his arms. "But if you want to arrest me, go ahead and try. Just know that the moment you do, I'm sending word to Federal Marshal Ben Hollister in Cheyenne. He and I go back a ways, and he takes a real dim view of corrupt local officials." Tucker's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. The mention of a federal marshal had clearly rattled him. "Hollister's got no jurisdiction here. Fraud crosses county lines, Sheriff. Makes it federal business." Sawyer's smile was cold. "So maybe before you ride out here throwing accusations around, you ought to ask yourself if Cyrus Blackwell's friendship is worth risking a federal investigation." The silence stretched taut as a wire. Maribel held her breath, felt Hazel trembling against her chest. One of the deputies whispered something to Tucker, but the sheriff waved him off impatiently. Finally, Tucker leaned forward in his saddle. "You're playing a dangerous game, Drummond." "I'm not playing at all. I'm standing up for a widow and her child against men who'd prey on them. If that's dangerous, so be it." "Mrs. Quinn's debt is real. Then prove it. Bring me legitimate papers, accurate accounting, and we'll talk. But if you come back here with more of Blackwell's lies, you'll be doing it without a badge because I will contact Marshal Hollister." Sawyer took a step forward. "Now, unless you've got actual business here, I suggest you leave. Mrs. Quinn and her daughter have been through enough today." Tucker stared at him for a long moment, calculation clear in his eyes. He was weighing options, Maribel realized, weighing the value of Blackwell's money against the risk of federal scrutiny. "This isn't over," Tucker finally said, gathering his reins. "It is for today." The sheriff turned his horse and rode off, his deputies following. They didn't look back. Maribel watched until they disappeared over the rise, then stumbled out onto the porch on shaking legs. "Sawyer, it's all right." But his hand was still near his gun, his body still coiled tight. "They're gone. For now, but you heard him. This isn't over. They'll come back, and next time they might not come just to talk." Her voice rose, edging toward panic. "You threatened the sheriff, Sawyer. You can't threaten the sheriff and expect no consequences." I didn't threaten him. I gave him information and let him make his own choice. You as good as called him corrupt, because he is corrupt. Sawyer's voice rose to match hers, then softened when he saw Hazel peeking fearfully around her mother's skirts. He took a deep breath. Look, I know this is scary, but men like Tucker and Blackwell, they're counting on you being too afraid to stand up to them. That's how they maintain power. The moment you show them you're not afraid, the moment you prove you'll fight back, they start to think twice. But what if they don't think twice? What if they just come back with more men, more guns? Then we'll deal with it. His eyes held hers. Maribel, I meant what I said earlier. Nothing's going to happen to you or Hazel. Not while I'm here. You can't promise that. You're one man against... Against what? A loan shark and his hired thugs? A corrupt sheriff? He smiled grimly. I've faced worse odds. When? Long story. Not one for little ears. He glanced at Hazel. Point is, I'm not leaving and I'm not backing down. So you can either trust me or spend every minute worrying. Your choice. It wasn't really a choice at all. Maribel had been worrying for 6 months straight, ever since Thomas died, and it had gotten her nowhere except exhausted and desperate. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to let someone else carry the burden for a while. I trust you, she heard herself say. Something shifted in Sawyer's expression, a softening around the eyes that made him look younger. Good. Now, why don't you take Hazel inside and rest while I finish up out here? And tonight, I'm cooking dinner. No arguments. I can cook. Maribel. She closed her mouth. He was right. Her feet were throbbing, and the morning's terror had left her drained. All right. But tomorrow I'm helping. I won't be useless in my own home. Nobody said you were useless, but even the strongest people need help sometimes. He turned back to the fence, effectively ending the conversation. Inside, Maribel settled Hazel on the bed with her doll and tried to rest, but her mind wouldn't quiet. Every creak of the cabin, every distant sound sent her heart racing. She kept seeing Coleman's hands reaching for Hazel, kept hearing her daughter's screams, kept reliving those awful moments when she'd thought she'd lost everything that mattered. Mama? Hazel's small voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. Are you sad? No, sweet Pete. Just tired. I'm tired too. Hazel crawled over and curled up against her mother's side. Can we take a nap? That sounds like a fine idea. They lay together in the afternoon quiet, Hazel's breathing gradually evening out as sleep claimed her. Maribel stayed awake, one arm wrapped protectively around her daughter, listening to Sawyer work outside. The rhythmic sound of hammer against nail became oddly soothing, a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. She must have dozed off despite herself, because the next thing she knew, shadows were lengthening across the cabin floor and the smell of cooking meat filled the air. Real meat. Not the thin salt pork she'd been rationing, but something rich and savory that made her stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. Hazel stirred beside her. Mama, something smells good. They emerged from the cabin to find Sawyer tending a fire he'd built in the yard, cooking what looked like rabbit on a makeshift spit. Beside him sat 2 freshly cleaned rabbits waiting their turn. You hunted, Maribel said, stating the obvious. Saw some cottontails out by the creek while I was working. Figured fresh meat would do you both good. He rotated the spit. This one's almost ready. The others we can save for tomorrow. I can't remember the last time we had rabbit. Hazel drifted closer, drawn by the smell. Papa used to hunt them, but then he got too busy with the ranch, and after he died, we didn't have traps. Well, you've got traps now. I'll set some tonight. Check them in the morning. Sawyer pulled the cooked rabbit off the fire and began carving it with his knife. Go on inside and wash up. Dinner's served. They ate at the rough table, the rabbit divided 3 ways, supplemented by the last of the cornmeal mush. The meat was perfectly cooked, tender and flavorful, and Maribel had to force herself to eat slowly when every instinct screamed at her to gulp it down before it disappeared. Hazel had no such restraint. She gnawed on her portion with single-minded intensity, grease shining on her chin, her eyes bright with pleasure. This is the best thing I ever ate! Better than your mama's cooking? Sawyer asked with a smile. Mama's cooking is good too, Hazel said loyally, but we haven't had meat in so long, And this is so yummy. Maribel felt tears prick her eyes. Her daughter shouldn't have to treat a simple rabbit dinner like a feast. Children should have enough to eat, should have meat and vegetables and bread, should never know the gnawing emptiness of constant hunger. Thank you, she whispered to Sawyer, for all of this. Just doing what needs doing. But his voice was gentle. Tomorrow I'll ride into town, pick up some supplies. Flour, beans, maybe some sugar if the store's got it. I told you I can't pay. I've got money saved. Been working for 5 years without much to spend it on. Might as well put it to good use. Sawyer, I can't let you... Maribel. He set down his knife and looked at her directly. You can, and you will. This isn't charity. This is what people do. They help each other. When you're back on your feet, you can pay me back if you want, or you can help someone else who needs it. That's how it works. She wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some shred of pride, but the truth was her daughter needed food, and she had no way to provide it. Sometimes survival meant swallowing your pride. All right, she said quietly, but I will pay you back, somehow. Fair enough. He returned his attention to his food. Now eat up before it gets cold. After dinner, Sawyer insisted on cleaning up while Maribel put Hazel to bed. The little girl fought sleep, her eyes drooping shut, then snapping open again, as if afraid that closing them might make everything disappear. The good cowboy, the full belly, the feeling of safety. Shh, Maribel soothed, stroking her daughter's hair. I'm right here, sweet pea. Nothing's going to hurt you. Promise? I promise. And Sawyer will stay? For now, yes. Forever? Maribel's throat tightened. I don't know about forever, honey, but for as long as we need him. Hazel's eyes finally closed, her breathing deepening into sleep. Maribel stayed beside her for a long while, watching the rise and fall of her small chest, thanking God or fate or whatever force had sent Sawyer Drummond down their road at exactly the right moment. When she finally emerged from the cabin, full darkness had fallen. Sawyer had built up the fire and was sitting beside it, whittling a piece of wood with his knife. The firelight played across his features, casting his face in warm shadows. She asleep? He asked without looking up. Finally, I think the excitement caught up with her. Maribel lowered herself carefully onto a log he'd dragged over to serve as a bench, grateful to be off her feet. What are you making? Horse. He held up the partially carved figure. Figured Hazel might like it. Give her something to play with besides that corn-husk doll. The gesture touched her more than it should have. That's very kind of you. Had a lot of practice. Used to carve things for my sister Sarah, back before... He trailed off, his knife stilling. Before the fever, Maribel finished softly. Yeah, before that. He resumed carving. Sarah loved horses. Begged Pa every day to let her ride, even though she was barely big enough to reach the stirrup. Pa always said when she turned 4, he'd teach her proper, but she died 2 months before her 4th birthday. I'm sorry. Long time ago, like I said, but I still remember her face when I'd give her a new carving, lit up like sunrise. His smile was sad. Hazel reminds me of her. That same hopeful look, like the world hasn't beaten it out of her yet. I'm trying to make sure it doesn't, but some days... Maribel's voice cracked. Some days, I don't know if I'm strong enough. You're stronger than you know. You survived Thomas's death, survived these months alone, survived this morning. That takes real strength, Maribel. It doesn't feel like strength. It feels like barely hanging on. Sometimes that's what strength looks like. Not some grand gesture, but just getting through one more day, one more hour, one more minute. He set down the carving and met her eyes across the fire. You've been doing that for months now, all by yourself. That's nothing to be ashamed of. The firelight caught the silver in his hair at the temples, made his eyes seem darker. He was younger than she'd first thought, probably not even 35. But life had marked him the way it marked everyone who lived out here on the edge of civilization, with lines and scars and a weathered toughness that came from facing hardship head on. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything? Why did you really stop this morning? And don't tell me it's just because Hazel reminds you of your sister. There's more to it than that. Sawyer was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. After my family died, I was lost, angry, spent years drifting, working one ranch after another, never staying anywhere long because I didn't want to care about anyone or anything, didn't want to risk losing people again. That sounds lonely. It was. Is. He picked up a stick and poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. But a few months back, I was working a drive up near the Montana border. We came across a homestead that had been burned out, Sioux raiders, or maybe just thieves, we never knew for sure. The family was gone, probably taken or killed, but their dog was still there. Half-starved, wounded, but still guarding the property like his people might come back any minute. What did you do? Nothing. Boss said we didn't have time to deal with a wounded animal, told us to shoot it and move on. And I almost did. Had my rifle raised, finger on the trigger. But then that dog looked at me and I saw... He paused. I saw myself. Saw what I'd become, empty and mean and alone, just waiting for someone to put me out of my misery. Did you shoot it? No, nursed it back to health instead, took it with me when the drive ended, named him Lucky. A small smile crossed his face. He's at the Double R right now, probably driving the foreman crazy. Point is, that dog reminded me that there's more to life than just surviving. That sometimes you have to fight, not just for yourself, but for someone who can't fight for themselves. He looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw understanding, connection, a shared knowledge of what it meant to lose everything and still keep breathing. So when I heard your daughter screaming this morning, he continued, when I saw those men trying to take her while you fought with everything you had, I couldn't just ride past. Wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I had. Maribel's throat was tight with emotion. You saved her. You saved us both. Maybe, or maybe you saved me. He returned his attention to the wooden horse, his knife moving in smooth, practiced strokes. Maybe we saved each other. They sat in comfortable silence after that, listening to the fire crackle and the night sounds of the prairie, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through sagebrush, the endless song of crickets. Above them, stars wheeled across a sky so vast and clear it seemed impossible that anything bad could exist in the world. But bad things did exist. Men like Cyrus Blackwell existed, and Sheriff Tucker, and countless others who preyed on the weak because they could. The question wasn't whether evil existed, it was whether good people would stand against it. Sawyer, Maribel said eventually, what happens if Blackwell doesn't give up? What if he decides you're too much trouble and sends men with orders to kill me? He said it matter-of-factly. Then they'd better be good shots because I don't plan on dying anytime soon. This isn't a joke. I'm not joking. Maribel, men like Blackwell, they're bullies. And bullies are fundamentally cowards. They don't want a fair fight. They want easy targets. The moment you prove you're not easy, they start looking elsewhere. You can't know that. No, I can't. But I know this. I'm not leaving. I'm not backing down. And I'm not letting anyone hurt you or Hazel. He finished the horse carving and held it up to the firelight, examining his work. This good enough, you think? Maribel looked at the small wooden figure. It was beautifully made with clear definition in the legs and mane, the kind of toy a child would treasure. It's perfect. Good. I'll give it to her in the morning. He stood and stretched, his joints popping. I should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day, riding to town, picking up supplies, setting those traps. You should rest, too. Those feet need time to heal. I will. But Sawyer? She stood as well, wobbling slightly on her bandaged feet. Thank you. For everything. For staying, for caring, for... She struggled to find words big enough for what she felt. For being the man you are. His smile was soft in the firelight. Thank you for letting me help. Sometimes a man needs purpose as much as he needs food or water. You've given me that. He banked the fire and headed toward the lean-to, where he'd arranged his bedroll earlier. Maribel watched him go, this stranger who'd become their protector in the space of a single day. She should have been afraid, letting a man she barely knew sleep so close to where she and Hazel lay vulnerable. But fear was the furthest thing from her mind. Instead, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed, Hope. Not the desperate, clawing hope of the drowning, but real hope. The kind that whispered maybe, just maybe, they'd survive this after all. Inside the cabin, she checked on Hazel one more time, then lay down on her own thin mattress. Through the window, she could see the glow of the banked fire and Sawyer's shadow moving in the lean-to as he settled for the night. The knowledge that he was there, standing between them, and whatever dangers the darkness might hold, let her finally, truly relax. For the first time in 6 months, Maribel Quinn fell asleep without tears on her face. But outside, beyond the circle of firelight, other eyes watched the homestead with cold calculation. Word had already spread that the Quinn widow had found herself a protector. And in Bitter Creek, Cyrus Blackwell sat in his fine house and planned his response to this unexpected defiance. The storm was coming. The only question was when it would break, and who would be left standing when it passed. Dawn broke clear and cold across the Wyoming prairie, painting the horizon in shades of rose and gold. Maribel woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee, not the chicory substitute she'd been drinking for months, and the sound of Sawyer moving quietly around outside. She lay still for a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar sensation of having slept through the entire night without waking in terror. Beside her, Hazel still slumbered, one small hand clutching her cornhusk doll, her face peaceful in sleep. Maribel allowed herself a few precious seconds to simply watch her daughter breathe, to count the blessing of another day together, before carefully extracting herself from the bed. Her feet were better this morning, the worst of the pain dulled to a manageable ache. She wrapped them in fresh cloth strips and pulled on her only other dress, a faded calico that had been pretty once, before time and hardship wore it thin. When she stepped outside, she found Sawyer checking his traps near the creek, 3 fat rabbits already hanging from his belt. "Morning," he called when he spotted her. "Coffee's hot. Help yourself." The coffee pot sat on a rock near the fire's remains, still steaming. Maribel poured herself a cup and wrapped her hands around it, savoring the warmth and the rich, bitter taste. Luxury. Such a simple thing, but it felt like wealth beyond measure. "You were up early," she said when Sawyer returned with the rabbits. "Old habit. Sun rises, I rise with it." He began the work of cleaning his catch with practiced efficiency. "Figured I'd get the hunting done before I ride into town. These'll keep you and Hazel fed while I'm gone." "How long will you be away?" "Most of the day, probably. Bitter Creek's a good 2 hours each way, and I want to be thorough about supplies." He paused in his work. "You'll be all right here alone?" "We've been alone for months." "Oh, that was before Blackwell knew someone was standing with you. He might send men while I'm gone, test your defenses." Fear flickered in Maribel's chest, but she pushed it down. "Then I'll deal with it if it happens. I'm not completely helpless, Sawyer. Thomas taught me to shoot before he died." "You have a gun?" "Old rifle. Hasn't been fired in a year, but it should still work." She hesitated. "Thomas took it to the mines with him for protection on the journey. When they brought his body back, the rifle came with it. I've kept it loaded ever since, just in case." Sawyer nodded slowly. "Good. That's good. But I want you to promise me something. If anyone comes, anyone at all, you take Hazel and you run. Don't try to fight, don't try to negotiate, just run." "Run where?" "We're 15 miles from town, and I don't have a horse." "Run to the Henderson place. It's only 3 miles east. They're good people. They'll help you." He met her eyes. "Promise me, Maribel. Your pride isn't worth your life or Hazel's." She wanted to argue, to insist she could defend her own home, but the memory of yesterday's helplessness was too fresh. "I promise." "All right, then." He finished with the rabbits and carried them to the cabin. "I'll leave after breakfast. Should be back before sunset." Hazel woke as they were cooking the morning meal, eggs from the chickens and some of the rabbit meat, fried up with the last precious pinch of salt. The little girl's face lit up when she saw Sawyer, and she ran to him without hesitation, clearly having decided overnight that he was safe. "Did you make me something?" she asked, remembering his whittling from the night before. Sawyer pulled the wooden horse from his pocket and handed it to her. "Thought you might like this." Hazel's squeal of delight was so pure and joyful it brought tears to Maribel's eyes. The child clutched the carved figure to her chest like it was made of gold. "It's beautiful. Look, Mama, look what Sawyer made me." I see, Sweet Pea. That was very kind of him. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hazel threw her arms around Sawyer's leg, the highest point she could reach, and hugged him fiercely. You're the best cowboy in the whole world. Something crossed Sawyer's face, a flash of such raw emotion that Maribel had to look away. He cleared his throat roughly and patted Hazel's head with gentle awkwardness. You're welcome, little miss. Now go wash up for breakfast. They ate together in the early morning light, and for a brief, perfect moment, they felt almost like a family. The illusion was bittersweet. Maribel knew it couldn't last, knew that Sawyer would eventually leave and they'd be alone again. But for now, for this one morning, she let herself pretend. After breakfast, Sawyer saddled Rosie and prepared for the ride to town. He checked his gun, verified his ammunition, and gave Maribel careful instructions on what to do if trouble came. Remember, he said as he swung into the saddle, anyone shows up, you run. Don't think, don't hesitate. Just grab Hazel and go. I remember. And keep that rifle close, loaded and ready. I will. He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead just nodded and turned Rosie toward the road. Maribel and Hazel watched from the porch as horse and rider disappeared over the rise, leaving them alone once more. The morning passed slowly. Maribel kept herself busy with chores, mending clothes, tidying the cabin, tending to the chickens and Bessie. But her attention was divided, always listening for the sound of approaching hoofbeats, always watching the horizon for signs of trouble. Hazel played quietly with her new wooden horse, creating elaborate stories about brave horses and magical adventures. The toy had given her something precious, a sense of normalcy, a reminder that good things still existed in the world. Maribel said a silent prayer of thanks for Sawyer's thoughtfulness. Around midday, as the sun reached its zenith and the prairie heat began to shimmer in waves, Maribel heard it. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, coming fast. Her heart seized. She grabbed the rifle from where it leaned against the cabin wall and called to Hazel. Sweet Pea, come inside, now! The urgency in her voice sent Hazel scrambling. Is it the bad men? I don't know. But we need to be ready. Maribel positioned herself by the window, rifle at the ready, mind racing through her options. Run, Sawyer had said. But what if she couldn't make it? What if they were already too close? 3 riders crested the rise, and Maribel's blood ran cold. She recognized 2 of them, Coleman Briggs and Wade Jessup, the men who'd tried to take Hazel yesterday. The third man was older, probably in his 50s, with silver hair and expensive clothes that marked him as someone with money and power. Cyrus Blackwell. It had to be. They rode straight into the yard with the confidence of men who expected no resistance. Blackwell dismounted first, smoothing his vest with manicured hands that had never known a day of hard labor. He was handsome in a cold, calculated way, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Mrs. Quinn, he called out pleasantly, as if they were neighbors meeting at a church social. Might I have a word? Maribel kept the rifle pointed at the ground, but visible. Her hands trembled, but she forced her voice steady. You're not welcome here, Mr. Blackwell. Leave my property. Now, is that any way to greet a visitor? I've come all this way to speak with you about your unfortunate situation. He took a step closer, and Maribel raised the rifle slightly. Blackwell stopped, hands raised in mock surrender. Easy, Mrs. Quinn. I mean you no harm. In fact, I've come with a generous offer. I'm not interested in anything you have to say. Not even if it clears your debt entirely? Wipes the slate clean? Gives you a fresh start? His smile widened. Surely that's worth hearing out. Against her better judgment, curiosity won. What kind of offer? Simple, really. Sign over the deed to this property, and I'll forgive the entire debt. $800, gone like smoke. You and your daughter can walk away free and clear, start over somewhere else. This land isn't worth $800. You know that. Perhaps not to you, but I have plans for this area and your property sits right in the middle of them, so I'm willing to be generous. He pulled papers from his coat. Sign here, and your troubles are over. And where exactly are Hazel and I supposed to go? This is our home. I'm sure you'll figure something out, a resourceful woman like yourself. Blackwell's tone remained pleasant, but his eyes had gone flat and hard. The alternative is far less pleasant, I'm afraid. If you don't sign, I'll have the sheriff evict you for non-payment. You'll lose the property anyway, and you'll still owe the debt. At least this way you leave with nothing hanging over your head. The debt is fraudulent. I've seen the papers. The interest rates don't match. The fees are invented. My husband paid back far more than he borrowed. That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Quinn. Do you have proof? I have all of Thomas's receipts, all the loan documents. Papers can be forged. Receipts can be faked. Blackwell's smile turned predatory. And who do you think Judge Morrison will believe? A grieving widow with everything to gain from lying? Or a respected businessman with a spotless reputation? A spotless reputation built on stealing from people too poor to fight back, Maribel shot back, anger overriding caution. You're nothing but a thief in nice clothes. Blackwell's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cruelty beneath. Careful, Mrs. Quinn. Insults won't improve your situation. Neither will signing my home over to you, so you can take your generous offer and leave. I'm trying to help you. You're trying to steal my land. Mama! Hazel's scream split the air. Maribel spun around to find Wade had somehow circled around to the cabin's back window. He'd reached through and grabbed Hazel, who kicked and fought against his grip. Without thinking, Maribel swung the rifle toward him. Let her go! Now, Mrs. Quinn, Blackwell said from behind her, his voice maddeningly calm. Let's not do anything rash. Wade, put the child down. Wade obeyed, but slowly, his message clear. They could reach Hazel whenever they wanted. Maribel was shaking so hard she could barely hold the rifle steady. She was outnumbered, outmatched, and they all knew it. Here's the reality of your situation, Blackwell continued, still standing in the yard. You're a widow with no money, no prospects, and no protection. Yesterday you got lucky. Some cowboy with a hero complex wandered by at the right moment. But he's not here now, is he? And even if he comes back, what's one man against the resources I can bring to bear? Sawyer won't let you, Sawyer Drummond? Blackwell laughed. I know all about Mr. Drummond, orphan, drifter, hired hand, no property, no connections, no future. You've tied your hopes to a man with nothing, Mrs. Quinn. How do you think that will end? Better than tying myself to you. Such spirit, I admire that, truly. But spirit doesn't fill empty bellies or keep roofs from leaking. Be practical. He held up the papers again. Sign over the property, take your daughter, and go somewhere you can actually build a life. Staying here is slow suicide. Get off my land! Mrs. Quinn, get off my land! Maribel raised the rifle to her shoulder, aiming directly at Blackwell's chest. Her finger rested on the trigger, and for one wild moment she considered pulling it. Considered ending this threat permanently? Consequences be damned. Blackwell saw the calculation in her eyes and took a careful step backward. Shooting me won't solve your problems. It'll just add murder to your troubles. Self-defense. You're trespassing, threatening my child. With 3 witnesses to say otherwise? He gestured to Coleman and Wade. They'll testify I came here peacefully with a business proposition and you opened fire without provocation. You'll hang, Mrs. Quinn. And what happens to your daughter then? She'll become a ward of the court, probably end up in an orphanage back east. Is that what you want? The image he painted was so horrible that Maribel's resolve wavered. The rifle dipped slightly. That's better. Blackwell's confidence returned. Now, let's be reasonable adults about this. I don't want to see you or your daughter hurt. I'm a businessman, not a monster. Sign the papers, and this all ends peacefully. No. The word came out stronger than Maribel felt. I don't care what you threaten or promise. This land was my husband's dream. It's all Hazel has left of her father. I won't sign it away to a man like you. Then you're a fool. The pleasant mask was gone now, replaced by cold fury. I've been patient, Mrs. Quinn, more patient than most men would be. But my patience is exhausted. You have 1 week to reconsider, 1 week to come to town, sign these papers, and accept my generosity. If you don't, he let the threat hang unfinished. If I don't, then I'll take the land anyway. I'll have the sheriff evict you for non-payment, and you'll leave with nothing. Not the land, not your possessions, nothing. You'll be destitute with a child to care for and nowhere to go. He climbed back onto his horse. 1 week, Mrs. Quinn. Use it wisely. The three men rode off at a leisurely pace, as if they had all the time in the world. Because they did, Maribel realized. They held all the power, all the cards. She was just one woman with a rifle and a child to protect. The moment they disappeared from view, her legs gave out. She sank to the porch steps, the rifle clattering beside her, and buried her face in her hands. Hazel rushed out and threw her arms around her mother's neck. "Mama, I was so scared. That bad man grabbed me again." "I know, Sweet Pea, I know." Maribel held her daughter tight, fighting back sobs. "But he's gone now. We're safe." "Are they going to come back?" The honest answer was yes, probably within a week if Blackwell's threat was real. But Maribel couldn't say that to her terrified daughter. "I don't know, baby. But whatever happens, Mama's going to keep you safe. I promise." It was another promise she wasn't sure she could keep. But what else could she do? She had no money, no allies except a cowboy she'd known for less than 2 days, and enemies with resources and connections she could never match. The smart thing would be to sign Blackwell's papers and leave. Take Hazel somewhere far from here and start over. But this land, this failing ranch, was all they had. Thomas had died trying to make it work. His dreams were buried in this soil, his hopes scattered across these empty fields. Walking away felt like betraying him, like saying his death meant nothing. Hours passed. Maribel kept Hazel close, the rifle always within reach, jumping at every sound. The afternoon sun crawled across the sky with agonizing slowness. Where was Sawyer? He should have been back by now. What if something had happened to him in town? What if Blackwell had sent men to intercept him? The questions spiraled through her mind, each more terrifying than the last, until she could barely breathe past the panic. She was imagining scenarios of Sawyer lying dead in an alley when she finally heard it. A single horse, moving at a steady trot. She grabbed the rifle and positioned herself defensively, only relaxing when she recognized Rosie's distinctive coloring. Sawyer rode into the yard with saddlebags bulging with supplies, looking tired but unharmed. Relief hit Maribel so hard she nearly dropped the rifle. Sawyer took one look at her face and was off his horse in an instant. "What happened?" The words tumbled out. Blackwell's visit, his threats, Wade grabbing Hazel through the window. Sawyer's expression grew darker with each detail, his jaw clenching until Maribel could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. "He threatened to take everything," she finished, her voice breaking. "And I couldn't stop him. I had the rifle, I had the high ground, and I still couldn't stop him." "You did exactly right. If you'd shot him, you'd be in jail and Hazel would be alone." Sawyer gripped her shoulders gently. "Listen to me. Blackwell came here to intimidate you, to make you feel powerless. Don't let him succeed." "But he's right about everything. We have no money, no connections, no way to fight him. We have the truth, and we have each other." He released her shoulders and began unloading his saddlebags. "I bought supplies in town, flour, beans, salt, sugar, some fabric for new clothes, and I sent a telegram to Marshal Hollister in Cheyenne." "You did what?" "Told him the situation, told him I had evidence of fraud. He's coming down to investigate." Sawyer pulled out a folded paper. "This is his reply. Says he'll be here in 3 days, 4 at most. Once he sees your loan documents and hears what Blackwell tried today, he'll have grounds for arrest." 3 days? Maribel's laugh was slightly hysterical. "Blackwell gave me a week. We just have to survive 3 more days." "We will, all of us." He hefted the bags of supplies. "Now let's get this food put away, and then I want to see those loan papers. I'm going to document everything, every fraudulent charge, every inflated interest rate, every invented fee. When the marshal arrives, I want to hand him an airtight case." They spent the rest of the afternoon organizing supplies and reviewing documents. Sawyer proved surprisingly methodical, creating a detailed ledger that tracked every discrepancy between what Thomas had actually borrowed and what Blackwell claimed was owed. The evidence was damning, clear proof of systematic fraud spanning months. "This is good," Sawyer said, reviewing his work. "Really good. Hollister will see this and know exactly what Blackwell's been doing. If we live long enough to show him." Maribel couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. 3 days is a long time, Sawyer. Anything could happen." "Then we'll be ready for it." He stood and stretched. "I'm going to reinforce the cabin tonight. Bar the windows, secure the doors. And I'm sleeping inside from now on, not in the lean-to." "Inside?" Maribel's cheeks heated. That wouldn't be proper." "Neither is letting you and Hazel face danger alone because I was worried about propriety." His tone brooked no argument. "I'll sleep by the door, fully dressed, gun in hand. Nothing improper about a man defending his—" He stopped, seeming to realize what he'd been about to say. "Defending his what?" Maribel asked softly. "His friends," Sawyer finished, but something in his eyes suggested that wasn't quite the word he'd meant. "You and Hazel. I'm defending you, that's all that matters." That night, true to his word, Sawyer barricaded the cabin. He nailed boards across the windows from the inside, leaving only narrow slits to see through. He propped furniture against the door and created a defensive position where he could watch both entrances simultaneously. The cabin felt like a fortress, cramped and dark, but secure. Hazel found the whole thing exciting at first, treating it like an adventure game. But as darkness fell and the reality of their situation became clear, she grew quiet and clingy. Maribel held her close while Sawyer kept watch, his rifle across his knees, his attention never wavering. "Tell me about your ranch," Maribel said eventually, needing to fill the tense silence. "The double R where you work." "Not much to tell. It's a good spread, about 5,000 acres. Run by a man named Robert Reynolds and his son Robert Jr. That's where the double R comes from. They raise cattle mostly, some horses. I've been working there for 5 years, longest I've stayed anywhere since my family died." "Why there? What made you stay?" Sawyer was quiet for a moment. "The boss, Senior, he reminds me of my father. Fair, honest, treats his hands with respect. When I first showed up looking for work, I was rough around the edges, angry at the world. Most ranchers would have turned me away, but Senior gave me a chance. Said he could see I was running from something, and when I was ready to stop running, I'd be welcome to stay as long as I wanted." "Are you still running?" "I thought I was. Thought I'd always be running." He glanced at her in the dim lamplight. "But maybe I've been looking for a reason to stop. Maybe I found it." The implication hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Maribel's heart beat faster, and she was grateful for the darkness that hid her burning cheeks. This was too much, too fast. She'd only known this man for 2 days. She couldn't possibly be feeling, but she was. God help her, she was. "Sawyer," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. A sound outside cut her off. Footsteps, careful and deliberate, moving around the cabin. Sawyer was on his feet in an instant, gun raised, positioning himself between the door and where Maribel sat with Hazel. "Stay down," he whispered. "Don't make a sound." The footsteps stopped at the door. Someone tested the handle, found it barred, and moved on to the window. Maribel heard scraping sounds, as if someone was trying to remove the board Sawyer had nailed up. "I know you're in there, Drummond," Wade's voice called out. "Blackwell sent me with a message. You've got until tomorrow night to clear out. Leave, and nobody gets hurt. Stay, and we'll burn you out." Sawyer didn't respond. He just stood there, silent and ready, his gun trained on the window. "You hear me, Cowboy? Tomorrow night. Be smart about this." More footsteps, then the sound of a horse riding away. But Sawyer didn't relax his stance. He stayed frozen, listening for what felt like hours. Finally, he lowered his gun slightly. "He's gone, but he might have left someone watching. We need to be ready for anything." Maribel realized she was shaking. Hazel had buried her face against her mother's chest, silent tears soaking through the fabric. Tomorrow night. Less than 24 hours before Blackwell made good on his threats. "The marshal," Maribel whispered. "He'll never get here in time." "Then we hold out until he does. Whatever it takes." Sawyer returned to his position by the door. "Try to sleep, both of you. I'll keep watch. You can't stay awake all night. I've done it before. I'll do it again." His voice was iron. "Sleep, Maribel. You're going to need your strength for tomorrow." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist on sharing the watch, but exhaustion pulled at her like an anchor. She lay down with Hazel, fully clothed, the rifle within reach, and tried to rest. But sleep was elusive. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind sent her jolting awake. And each time she opened her eyes, she saw Sawyer there, still as stone, watching over them, protecting them. Somewhere in the darkest hours of night, the terrible realization settled over her like a heavy blanket. Blackwell wouldn't wait. He'd come tomorrow, today, now, with dawn only hours away. And when he came, it would be with enough men to overwhelm even Sawyer's determination. They were going to lose everything, the ranch, their home, possibly their lives, unless they fought back with everything they had. And as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the cracks in the boarded windows, Maribel made a decision. If Cyrus Blackwell wanted a fight, then by God she'd give him one. The first rays of sunlight found Maribel already awake, sitting at the table with Thomas's tin box open before her. She'd been thinking all night, turning the problem over and over in her mind, like a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit. Sawyer dozed lightly by the door, his body positioned so he'd wake at the slightest sound. Hazel still slept, exhausted by fear and the constant tension of the past 2 days. Maribel pulled out the loan documents again, studying them in the growing light. There had to be something here, some way to fight back that didn't involve waiting helplessly for either the marshal's arrival or Blackwell's next attack. Her eyes scanned the signatures, the witness marks, the official-looking stamps that gave the fraudulent papers an air of legitimacy. Then she saw it. A detail she'd missed before, hidden in the fine print at the bottom of the contract. The loan had been witnessed by someone named Martha Henley, whose signature appeared neat and precise beneath Thomas's shaky scrawl. Maribel didn't recognize the name, but something about it tugged at her memory. "Sawyer," she whispered, not wanting to wake Hazel. "Sawyer, wake up!" He was alert instantly, hand going to his gun. "What is it? They coming?" "No, look at this." She pointed to the signature. "Martha Henley. She witnessed the original loan. Do you know who that is?" Sawyer leaned closer, squinting at the signature. His expression shifted from confusion to recognition. "Henley. Yeah, I know that name. There's a boarding house in Bitter Creek run by a widow named Martha Henley. Respectable woman, runs a clean establishment. Why? Because if she witnessed this document, she'd have been there when Thomas signed it. She'd know what the actual terms were, what interest rate was agreed upon." Maribel's excitement grew. She could testify that these papers have been altered. If she's willing to go against Blackwell, that's a big if, Maribel. He's got power in that town, but she's not dependent on him for her livelihood. A boarding house owner, she'd have income from travelers, from cowboys passing through. She wouldn't be as vulnerable to his pressure as someone who owes him money. Maribel stood, her decision made. "I need to talk to her. Before Blackwell comes tonight, I need to get her statement." "You can't go into town. It's too dangerous." "Then you go. Ride to Bitter Creek, find Martha Henley, ask her what she remembers." Maribel gripped his arm. "Please, Sawyer, this might be our only chance to get real proof, the kind even Judge Morrison couldn't ignore." Sawyer looked torn, his eyes moving between Maribel and the barricaded door. "I don't want to leave you unprotected. We'll go to the Henderson place like you suggested. Mrs. Henderson is kind. She'll take us in for a few hours. You can ride to town, talk to Martha Henley, and come back with her testimony. We'll be safe with neighbors, and you'll be back before nightfall." "What if Blackwell's men are watching? What if they follow you to the Hendersons? Then at least we won't be alone. Please, Sawyer. We can't just sit here waiting for them to burn us out. We have to fight back." He studied her face for a long moment, and Maribel saw the moment he made his decision. "All right, but we do this smart. I'll escort you to the Hendersons first, make sure you're safe, then ride to town. And you stay there until I come back, understand? No matter what you hear, no matter what you think is happening at your property, you stay put." "I promise." They woke Hazel gently and explained the plan in simple terms. They were going to visit Mrs. Henderson while Sawyer ran an errand. The little girl accepted this with the resilience of childhood, apparently convinced that as long as Sawyer was involved, everything would be all right. The ride to the Henderson place was tense. Sawyer rode Rosie while Maribel and Hazel perched behind him. Maribel's arms wrapped around his waist and Hazel sandwiched between them. Every shadow seemed threatening, every distant sound potentially dangerous, but they reached the neighboring ranch without incident. Ida Henderson was a sturdy woman in her 60s, weathered by prairie life but with kind eyes and capable hands. She took one look at Maribel's haggard face and Hazel's frightened expression and ushered them inside without questions. "You're in some kind of trouble," she stated, rather than asked once they were settled in her kitchen with cups of tea. Maribel explained everything: Thomas's death, the loan, Blackwell's attempts to take Hazel, Sawyer's intervention. Ida listened with growing fury, her mouth pressing into a thin line. "That snake," she finally said. "Cyrus Blackwell's been preying on desperate folks for years, but taking a child? That's beyond the pale, even for him." She turned to Sawyer. "You're a good man standing up for them like this. Your mama raised you right." "Yes, ma'am, she tried to." Sawyer stood, his hat in his hands. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to ride into town for a few hours. Would you keep them safe?" "Of course I will. My husband James is out checking the north fence, but he'll be back by noon. Nobody's going to trouble these two under my roof." "Thank you, ma'am." Sawyer knelt down to Hazel's level. "You be good for Mrs. Henderson, all right? Mind your mama, and I'll be back before you know it." "You promise?" Hazel's lower lip trembled. "I promise." He pulled something from his pocket, another wooden carving, this one smaller, a tiny horse that matched the one he'd given her earlier. "This is Rosie's baby. You keep her safe until I get back with her mama." Hazel clutched the carving like a talisman. "I'll keep her very safe." Sawyer's eyes met Maribel's over Hazel's head, and something passed between them: understanding, trust, and something deeper that neither was ready to name. "Be careful," Maribel whispered. "Always am." Then he was gone, Rosie's hoofbeats fading into the distance. The morning dragged by with agonizing slowness. Ida kept them busy with small tasks, helping prepare lunch, mending some clothes, entertaining Hazel with stories, but Maribel couldn't stop watching the window, couldn't stop imagining all the things that could go wrong. What if Blackwell's men intercepted Sawyer on the road? What if Martha Henley refused to help? What if this was all for nothing and they'd still end up losing everything? Around noon, James Henderson returned, a tall, taciturn man who said little but exuded quiet competence. Ida filled him in on the situation, and his response was to retrieve his rifle and position himself on the porch, where he had a clear view of the road. "Nobody's taking children from my neighbors," was all he said, but the steel in his voice made it clear he meant it. The afternoon sun climbed higher, and still Sawyer didn't return. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. Maribel's anxiety grew with each passing minute. What if something had happened? What if he wasn't coming back? "He'll be here," Ida said, reading her expression. "That young man has the look of someone who keeps his promises. He'll be here." But the sun was sinking toward the horizon when they finally heard hoofbeats. Maribel rushed to the window, relief flooding through her when she recognized Rosie. But Sawyer wasn't alone. There was a woman riding behind him, older, with silver-streaked hair and a determined set to her jaw. Martha Henley. They dismounted, and Sawyer helped the older woman down with careful courtesy. Maribel met them on the porch, hardly daring to hope. "Mrs. Quinn," Martha said, taking both of Maribel's hands in hers. "I remember your husband. Good man, honest man. What Cyrus Blackwell has done to you is unconscionable, and I won't stand for it anymore. You'll testify? You'll tell the truth about what you witnessed?" "More than that." Martha's smile was grim. "I brought the original ledger from when your husband signed that loan. I keep copies of all documents I witness. Learned that lesson years ago when a dispute nearly cost me my business. The ledger shows the real terms. $300 at 5% annual interest, not the 15% Blackwell's been claiming." Maribel's knees went weak. "You have proof, real, documented proof." "I do. And I'll testify to it before the marshal, before a judge, before God himself, if need be." Martha's voice hardened. "Cyrus Blackwell threatened my business once when I wouldn't falsify records for him. I've been too scared to speak up until now, but no more. What he tried to do to your daughter, taking a child over a fraudulent debt, that's where I draw the line." Sawyer was grinning, the first genuine smile Maribel had seen on his face. "There's more. I stopped by the telegraph office and sent another message to Marshal Hollister. Told him we had a witness and documentation. He sent back saying he's riding through the night. He'll be here by dawn tomorrow instead of waiting another 3 days." "Tomorrow?" Maribel could barely process the information. But Blackwell's deadline is tonight. He'll come with his men. Try to burn us out. Let him try, James Henderson spoke up from where he'd been listening silently. Ida and I will stand with you. My brother lives 2 miles south. I'll send word to him. Between all of us, we can hold off Blackwell until the marshal arrives. I can't ask you to risk your lives. You're not asking. We're offering. Ida's voice was firm. This is what neighbors do. We stand together against bullies and thieves. Always have, always will. Maribel felt tears streaming down her face. Not tears of fear this time, but tears of gratitude and hope. She wasn't alone anymore. She had allies, friends, people willing to fight beside her. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you all. Don't thank us yet, James said pragmatically. We've got a long night ahead. Sawyer, help me fortify the Quinn place. If Blackwell's coming, we'll be ready for him. They rode back to Maribel's ranch as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. James had brought his brother Henry and 2 ranch hands, all armed and grim-faced. Martha Henley insisted on coming too, declaring that her testimony was too important to risk leaving at the boarding house. The cabin and its surroundings were transformed into a defensive position. The men reinforced the barricades, positioned themselves at strategic points, and made sure everyone had clear fields of fire. Ida took charge of Hazel, keeping the little girl calm and distracted with stories while the adults prepared for battle. As darkness fell, an eerie quiet settled over the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, and everyone waited. Maribel stood by the cabin window, rifle in hand, positioned beside Sawyer. What if they don't come? She asked quietly. They'll come. Men like Blackwell don't make threats they don't intend to keep. It's about power. If he backs down now, he loses credibility. Sawyer checked his ammunition for the 3rd time. But he's going to get a surprise when he finds us ready for him. I'm scared. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He glanced at her in the lamplight. But don't let it control you. When they come, you focus on protecting Hazel. That's all that matters. Everything else is just noise. What about protecting you? What if you... She couldn't finish the sentence. I'll be fine. I've been in worse scrapes than this. His hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed gently. But Maribel, if something does happen to me, you promise me you'll take that ledger and Martha's testimony straight to the marshal. Promise me you won't give up. Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me anyway. I promise. Her voice broke. But you better keep your promise too. You said you'd stay until this was over. I did. And I will. He released her hand as James whistled softly from his position outside. The signal they'd agreed upon. Someone was coming. Hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching from the main road. Maribel's heart hammered against her ribs as she peered through the narrow gap in the boards. In the moonlight, she could make out shapes, 5, 6, maybe 7 riders, moving steadily toward the property. They stopped about 50 yards out, just beyond easy rifle range. A figure dismounted and walked forward, hands raised to show he was unarmed. As he moved into the light of the moon, Maribel recognized Cyrus Blackwell's silver hair. Mrs. Quinn, he called out, I believe we had an agreement. Tonight was your deadline. Time to leave peacefully or face the consequences. Sawyer stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready. She's not going anywhere, Blackwell, and neither is her daughter. Ah, Mr. Drummond, still playing the hero? Blackwell's tone was mocking. I admire your dedication, truly, but surely you realize this is pointless. I have 7 men with me, all armed and willing to do whatever's necessary. You're one cowboy with a rifle. The math doesn't favor you. The math's a little different than you think. At James's signal, the other defenders revealed themselves, James and Henry on either side of the cabin, the 2 ranch hands positioned near the barn and lean-to. 6 against 7. Those are odds I'll take. Blackwell's confidence faltered, just for a moment. This is madness. You'd risk your lives for a piece of worthless land and a woman who can't even pay her debts. The debt is fraudulent, Martha Henley's voice rang out from the cabin doorway. I witnessed the original loan, Cyrus. $300 at 5% interest, not 15. I have the ledger to prove it. The silence that followed was profound. Maribel could see Blackwell's posture stiffen with shock and rage. "Martha," he finally said, his voice dangerously soft, "you'd be wise to stay out of this. Remember what happened the last time you opposed me? You threatened my business, threatened to ruin me. I was too afraid to speak up then." Martha stepped fully into view, standing tall despite her age. "But I'm not afraid anymore. Thomas Quinn paid back his loan plus interest. His widow owes you nothing, and I'll swear to that before any judge in the territory. Your word against mine. Who do you think they'll believe? They'll believe the ledger. They'll believe the documented proof of your fraud." Martha's voice was steel. "And they'll believe Federal Marshal Ben Hollister, who's riding here right now to investigate your business practices. He'll be here by dawn." The words hit like physical blows. Blackwell took a step backward, and Maribel could see him recalculating, reassessing his options. Behind him, his men shifted uneasily. Taking on a few defenders was one thing. Taking them on with a federal marshal en route was something else entirely. "You're bluffing," Blackwell said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Am I?" Sawyer pulled a folded telegram from his pocket. "Got confirmation this afternoon. Marshal Hollister's exact words were, 'Will arrive Quinn property at dawn. Hold position.' So the question is, Blackwell, do you want to be here when he arrives? Because interfering with a federal investigation carries serious penalties." Blackwell stood frozen, visible even in the moonlight. Maribel held her breath, waiting. Everything balanced on this moment. Would he back down, or would his pride drive him to attack despite the risks? Finally, Blackwell turned to his men. "Mount up, we're leaving." "But boss," Wade started to protest. "I said mount up." The fury in Blackwell's voice was palpable. "This isn't over, Drummond, not by a long shot." "Yes, it is." Sawyer's voice was calm but final. "It's over, Blackwell. You lost. Now get off Mrs. Quinn's property before I decide to hold you here for the marshal myself." For a moment, Maribel thought Blackwell might refuse, might let his rage override his survival instinct. But then he spun on his heel and stalked back to his horse. His men followed, confusion and relief mingling on their faces. They rode away into the darkness, and this time, Maribel knew they wouldn't be coming back. The defenders held their positions for another hour, making sure it wasn't a trick, that Blackwell wasn't circling back for a surprise attack. But the prairie remained quiet, empty except for the wind and the stars overhead. "He's gone," James finally said, lowering his rifle. "Really gone." The relief was overwhelming. Maribel's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the porch steps, her whole body shaking with delayed reaction. Hazel burst out of the cabin and threw herself into her mother's arms, and Maribel held her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her daughter's hair. "It's over," she whispered. "Sweet pea, it's really over." Sawyer sat down beside them, his own exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. "Not quite over yet. We still need to wait for the marshal, get everything officially documented. But the worst of it? Yeah, that's done." Martha Henley joined them, looking satisfied despite the late hour. "I'll stay until the marshal arrives, give my testimony. After that, Cyrus Blackwell will be lucky if all he loses is his business. Fraud, attempted extortion, threatening a federal witness. He's facing real prison time." "Because of you," Maribel said, reaching out to clasp the older woman's hand. "Because you were brave enough to speak up." "Because you were brave enough to fight," Martha corrected. "If you'd just signed over your land like he wanted, this would never have come to light. Your courage gave me courage." The Henderson brothers and their ranch hands departed as midnight approached, promising to return in the morning to witness the marshal's arrival. Ida stayed behind, insisting that Maribel needed another woman around after such an ordeal. Together, they settled Hazel into bed, the little girl finally allowing herself to sleep deeply, secure in the knowledge that the bad men weren't coming back. Maribel stood on the porch in the small hours of morning, watching the stars wheel overhead. Sawyer emerged from the cabin and stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You did it," he said quietly. "Stood up to a powerful man and won. We did it. I never could have done this alone." She turned to face him. "Sawyer, I don't know how to thank you for everything. You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. You saved my daughter's life. You saved my home. You saved me." Her voice dropped to a whisper. You gave me hope when I had none left. Maribel, he seemed to struggle with words. When I rode down this road 2 days ago, I was just drifting, going through the motions of living without really being alive. But you and Hazel, you reminded me what I'd been missing. Purpose, connection, family. Family, Maribel repeated softly. I know it's too soon. I know you're probably not ready to think about... He trailed off, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen him. But when this is all settled, when the marshal's done his investigation and Blackwell's in custody, I'd like to stay. If you'll have me. Not as a hired hand, but as what? Her heart was pounding. As someone who cares about you, about Hazel. As someone who wants to help you rebuild this ranch and make it into what Thomas dreamed it could be. He took off his hat, turning it in his hands nervously. As someone who maybe, eventually, if you're willing, could be more than just a friend. Maribel felt tears on her cheeks, but these were tears of joy. I'd like that. Hazel would like that too. She already thinks you hung the moon. What about you? His eyes searched hers. What do you think? Instead of answering with words, Maribel stepped closer and rested her head against his chest, feeling his arms come around her carefully, protectively. They stood like that in the darkness, two wounded souls who'd found each other at exactly the right moment. I think, she finally said, that sometimes God sends angels when we need them most. And sometimes those angels look like cowboys on horses named Rosie. His laugh rumbled through his chest. First time anyone's called me an angel. Well, you're mine. Hazel's too. She pulled back just enough to look up at him. And yes, Sawyer Drummond, when this is all over, I'd very much like you to stay. Dawn broke clear and beautiful across the Wyoming prairie, painting the world in shades of gold and promise. True to his word, Marshal Ben Hollister arrived just as the sun crested the horizon, accompanied by 2 deputy marshals and an air of absolute authority. He listened to their testimonies, examined Martha's ledger, reviewed the loan documents with a trained eye. His face grew progressively grimmer as the extent of Blackwell's fraud became clear. I'll need you all to come into Bitter Creek and make formal statements, he said finally. Mrs. Henley, your testimony is particularly crucial. Mrs. Quinn, I'll need copies of all your husband's payment receipts and the original loan papers. What will happen to Blackwell? Maribel asked. He'll be arrested and charged with fraud, extortion, and attempted kidnapping. The evidence is overwhelming. Hollister's smile was grim. He's going to prison for a long time, and every fraudulent loan he's made will be reviewed and corrected. You're not his only victim, Mrs. Quinn. There are probably dozens of people he's been robbing for years. By midday, Cyrus Blackwell was in custody, his protests of innocence falling on deaf ears. Sheriff Tucker, faced with the choice of cooperating with the federal investigation or being charged as an accomplice, suddenly remembered numerous complaints about Blackwell he'd previously ignored. The wheels of justice, once set in motion, turned with surprising speed. Within a week, Blackwell's entire operation had been dismantled. Maribel's debt was officially declared null and void. More than that, based on Thomas's payment receipts, the court determined that Blackwell actually owed her money, nearly $200 that had been paid but never properly credited. With that money, plus the supplies Sawyer had purchased and his help with the heavy work, the ranch began to transform. They planted a late garden that would provide vegetables for winter. Sawyer fixed the irrigation channels Thomas had dug, and water flowed where before there'd been only dust. The 3 chickens multiplied to a dozen. They bought a young horse for Hazel, who named her Rosie Jr. and loved her with the fierce devotion only a child could muster. And through it all, slowly but surely, Maribel and Sawyer built something stronger than a ranch. They built a family. 6 months after that terrible morning when Coleman and Wade had tried to take Hazel, Maribel stood in her cabin, now expanded with a second room and a proper kitchen, and watched Sawyer teach her daughter to braid rope. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so beautifully ordinary, that it made her heart ache with gratitude. Sawyer had officially given notice at the Double R, though he still helped out during cattle drives. The rest of his time was spent here, working the ranch alongside Maribel, building it into something sustainable and profitable. They'd become partners in every sense that mattered, though they'd yet to formalize it with a wedding. That would come in time, Maribel knew. There was no rush. They had all the time in the world. "Mama, look!" Hazel held up her finished braid, beaming with pride. "Sawyer taught me, and I did it all by myself." "That's wonderful, sweet pea." Maribel moved to admire her daughter's work, and Sawyer caught her hand as she passed, squeezing gently. "She's a natural," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Give her a few more years and she'll be able to work cattle with the best of them." "She shouldn't have to work cattle. She should get to be a child." "She can be both." "I was." He pulled Maribel down to sit beside him on the bench. "Besides, there's value in learning to work hard, to build something with your own hands. Your Thomas understood that. That's why he fought so hard for this place." Maribel looked around the cabin, at the sturdy walls and tight roof, at the supplies in the cupboard, and the warmth of the fire. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs, built by determination and defended by courage. "He'd be proud of what we've done here," she said softly, "and he'd be grateful that you were the one who—" She paused, struggling with emotion. "That you were the one who saved us." "You saved yourselves. I just helped." "You did more than help, Sawyer. You gave us a future." That evening, after Hazel had been tucked into bed with her wooden horses and her corn-husk doll, Sawyer and Maribel sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the prairie. The sky was ablaze with color, and the air smelled of sage and possibility. "I got a letter from Martha Henley today," Maribel said, pulling the envelope from her pocket. "She's been called to testify in 3 more fraud cases against people Blackwell victimized. Says she finally feels like she's doing some good in the world." "She is. Without her testimony, we never could have proven the fraud." "I know. I wrote her back, told her she was welcome here any time." Maribel leaned her head on Sawyer's shoulder. "It's strange how something so terrible led to so much good. If Coleman and Wade hadn't tried to take Hazel, if you hadn't come riding down that road at exactly the right moment, none of this would have happened." "Fate," Sawyer said simply, "or providence, or just dumb luck. Whatever you want to call it." "I call it a blessing." She lifted her head to look at him. "You're a blessing, Sawyer Drummond, to me and to Hazel. I hope you know that." "I know, and you're a blessing to me too." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it up to catch the last rays of sunlight. It was a ring, simple and hand-carved from wood, with Maribel's initials etched carefully on the inside. "I know we said we'd wait," he began, suddenly nervous. "I know it's only been 6 months and people might talk and you might not be ready, but—" "Yes," Maribel interrupted, her heart soaring. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want you to be Hazel's father in truth, not just in practice. Yes to all of it." She held out her hand and he slipped the wooden ring onto her finger with trembling hands. "I love you, Sawyer. I think I have since that first morning when you stepped between us and danger without even knowing our names. I love you too." He pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of promises and forever. "I love you, and Hazel, and this life we're building together. I love it all." They sat together as darkness fell and the stars emerged, planning their future in whispered conversations. They'd have a proper wedding in the spring, they decided. Small and simple, just close friends and neighbors. Martha Henley would stand up with Maribel, and James Henderson would stand with Sawyer. Hazel would wear a new dress, the first truly new dress she'd ever owned, and carry wildflowers from the prairie. And after the wedding, they'd continue building the ranch, building their family, building a legacy that Thomas had started, and they would finish together. Inside the cabin, Hazel dreamed of horses and kind cowboys, and a future that held no fear. She didn't understand all of what had happened. She was too young to grasp the full complexity of fraud and corruption and the courage it took to stand against them. But she understood the important things. She understood that her mama was happy now, really happy, in a way she hadn't been since Papa died. She understood that Sawyer was safe and good and would protect them always. She understood that they were a family, complete and whole and loved. And perhaps, in her child's wisdom, she understood better than any adult that sometimes the worst moments in life were just doorways to something better. That sometimes you had to face darkness before you could truly appreciate the light. Years later, when Hazel was grown with children of her own, she would tell them the story of the cowboy who rode down a dusty lane at exactly the right moment. She'd tell them about her mother's courage and Martha Henley's bravery and the community that stood together against corruption. But mostly, she'd tell them about love. About how love appeared when you needed it most, dressed in worn denim and carrying a rifle. About how love stood between you and danger without hesitation. About how love rebuilt broken things and made them stronger than before. About how love, in the end, was the only thing that truly mattered. The Wyoming wind whispered across the prairie that night, carrying with it the promise of better days ahead. In the cabin, a family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were safe, they were loved, and they were home. And in the lean-to, Rosie shifted in her sleep, dreaming hoarse dreams of open range and endless grass, content in the knowledge that she'd carried her rider to exactly where he needed to be. The story that began with screams and terror ended with love and hope. It was a happy ending, hard-won and well-deserved. And for Maribel Quinn, Sawyer Drummond, and young Hazel, it was really just the beginning. Their life together stretched out before them like the prairie itself, vast and beautiful and full of possibility. There would be challenges ahead, certainly, hard winters and dry summers, setbacks and struggles, but they would face them together, as a family. And that made all the difference. Because sometimes, when you're at your lowest point, when you think all hope is lost and darkness has won, a stranger rides into your life and changes everything. Sometimes that stranger sees you, really sees you, and decides that your fight is worth joining. And sometimes, just sometimes, that stranger stays forever.